Because of the highly excitable nature of the situation, Captain Dunn requested that Joseph and his party return with him to Nauvoo while the weapons were secured. Complying with this request, the prophet sent messengers in two directions. The first to Governor Ford, making him aware of the delay in arrival, and the second to Major General Jonathan Dunham, instructing the Nauvoo Legion to deposit their individual arms at the Masonic Hall in Nauvoo. Joseph then returned with the company. Members of the Legion were reluctant to give up their weapons, fearing a Missouri massacre, but did as the prophet requested. While in Nauvoo, Joseph visited his home twice, bidding a saddened farewell each time. When the arms were in the hands of Captain Dunn, the brethren again commenced their lengthy journey to Carthage. Nearing his farm, Joseph kept turning and slowing the pace while he viewed the pleasant scene. Others, anxious to be on their way, remarked about the delay. Joseph responded to their anxieties by saying,
"If some of you had such a farm and knew you would not see it any more, you would want to take a good look at it for the last time."
The company was again at the fellow's farm about 9 o'clock in the evening. Here they were joined by Captain Dunn, who escorted them safely into Carthage, arriving at midnight. On their way to the Hamilton House, the brethren passed the public square where a number of state troops were quartered. Aroused by the appearance of the Mormons, the calls of the Carthage Greys were clearly heard by the brethren.
"Clear the way and let us have a view of Joe Smith, the prophet of God. He has seen his last of Nauvoo. We'll use him up now and kill all the infernal Mormons."
At Hamilton's, Governor Ford was stirred by the clamoring crowd that followed the prophet to his lodgings. Ford stuck his head out of the window and quieted the throng with the assurance,
Gentlemen, I know your great anxiety to see Mr. Smith, which is natural enough. But it is quite too late tonight for you to have the opportunity. But I assure you, gentlemen, you shall have the privilege tomorrow morning, as I will cause him to pass before the troops upon the square. And I now wish you, with this assurance, quietly and peaceably to return to your quarters.
With a faint declaration of hurrah for Tom Ford, the governor's request was obeyed. Ironically, Joseph's night at the Hamilton Hotel was spent under the same roof as the very apostates who had created this crucial situation. William Law, Wilson Law, the Higbees, and the Fosters were also registered there. The next morning, June 25, 1844, the brethren who were charged with riot voluntarily submitted themselves to Constable David Bettesworth, holder of the original writ against them. Much to the amazement of the saints, Joseph and Hyrum were also arrested on a charge of treason against the state of Illinois. This action was taken on the strength of writs which had been issued on the oaths of Augustine Spencer and Henry O. Norton. Governor Ford fulfilled the promise of the previous evening by ordering the militia to form a hollow square on the public ground near the courthouse. Mounting an old table, the governor addressed the troops for 20 or 30 minutes. He then went to the Hamilton House and invited Joseph to walk with him through the troops. Obedient to the wishes of Thomas Ford, Joseph, Hyrum, Dr. Richards, John Taylor, and W.W. Phelps trooped the line with the governor and Brigadier General Minor R. Deming with the following results.
Joseph and Hyrum were introduced by Governor Ford about 20 times along the line, as General Joseph Smith and General Hyrum Smith, the governor walking in front on the left. The Carthage Greys refused to receive them by that introduction, and some of the officers threw up their hats, drew their swords, and said they would introduce themselves to the blasted Mormons in a different style. The governor mildly entreated them not to act so rudely, but their excitement increased. The governor, however, succeeded in pacifying them that they should have full satisfaction.
The prophet and his party then returned to the Hamilton House. A number of officers from Carthage and other commands came to the Hamilton House to gratify their curiosity concerning the prophet. Joseph invited them into his room. As they grouped around, Joseph asked them if there was anything in his appearance that indicated he was the desperate character his enemies represented him to be. They replied,
"No, sir, your appearance would indicate the very contrary, General Smith. But we cannot see what is in your heart. Neither can we tell what are your intentions."
Joseph then responded with a searching statement and significant prophecy.
Very true, gentlemen. You cannot see what is in my heart, and you are therefore unable to judge me or my intentions. But I can see what is in your hearts, and will tell you what I see. I can see you thirst for blood, and nothing but my blood will satisfy you. It is not for crime of any description that I and my brethren are thus continually persecuted and harassed by our enemies, but there are other motives, and some of them I have expressed, so far as relates to myself, and inasmuch as you and the people thirst for blood, I prophesy in the name of the Lord that you shall witness scenes of blood and sorrow to your entire satisfaction. Your soul shall be perfectly satiated with blood, and many of you who are now present shall have an opportunity to face the cannon's mouth from sources you think not of. And those people that desire this great evil upon me and my brethren shall be filled with regret and sorrow because of the scenes of desolation and distress that await them. They shall seek for peace, and shall not be able to find it. Gentlemen, you will find what I have told you to be true.
Fulfillment of this prediction was given substance for the men of western Illinois in the almost complete annihilation of the 1st and 2nd Illinois regiments in the Battle of Buena Vista during the Mexican War. The many sacrifices experienced by Illinoisans in the Civil War further verified Joseph's prophecy. Joseph, his brother Hyrum, and 13 other defendants were taken before Robert F. Smith, a justice of the peace, on the charge of riot in destroying the Nauvoo Expositor Press. Sufficient reason being found to bind over the trial of the defendants to the next term of the Circuit Court for Hancock County, the court set bond at $500 for each of the accused. To the surprise of the court, the brethren were able to put up the $7,500 in sureties, and none of them were held for want of bail. Most of the brethren then left for Nauvoo. However, Joseph and Hyrum remained in Carthage for a promised interview with Governor Ford. After their conversation with Ford, they returned to their own lodgings. Here they were approached by Constable David Bettesworth, who insisted that they must go to jail with him. Joseph demanded a mitimus, a writ commanding the constable to convey to prison the persons named. But this was refused. Joseph's legal counsel, Messrs. Wood and Reed, informed the constable that the accused were entitled to be brought before a justice of the peace for examination before they could be jailed. To everyone's surprise, the constable then produced a mitimus stating that Joseph and Hyrum had been brought before Robert F. Smith on a charge of treason, and that they be placed in jail until released by due course of law. Robert F. Smith had issued a false mitimus, stating that the brothers had previously appeared before him and should be in jail. This was done to keep them from leaving town. Joseph's lawyer, Mr. Wood, went immediately to the governor and decried the illegal act, but Thomas Ford refused to interfere with a civil officer in the discharge of his duty. Robert Smith, also a captain in the Carthage Greys, commanded Captain Dunn and 20 men to carry out the order to place the brothers in jail. A crowd of rabble began to gather in the street and around the door. Fearing that the prisoners might be murdered on their way to jail, a number of brethren surrounded Joseph and Hyrum in order to give them some protection.
Captain Dunn, with his company, escorted Joseph and Hyrum Smith from their lodgings, together with Willard Richards, John Taylor, John P. Green, Stephen Markham, Dan Jones, John S. Fulmer, Dr. Southwick, and Lorenzo D. Wasson to jail. Markham had a very large hickory cane, which he called the rascal beater. Dan Jones had a smaller walking stick, and they walked on either side of Joseph and Hyrum, keeping off the drunken rabble who several times broke through the ranks. They were received by the jailer, Mr. George W. Stegall, and put into the criminal cell. But he afterwards gave them the debtors' apartments, where the prisoners and their friends had amusing conversations on various interesting subjects, which engaged them till late. Prayer was offered, which made Carthage prison into the gate of heaven for a while.
Governor Ford finally visited Joseph the next day after repeated requests for an audience. The two engaged in a lengthy conversation relative to the existing difficulties. At the conclusion of the interview, Joseph remarked to the governor,
I shall look to you for our protection. I believe you are talking of going to Nauvoo. If you go, sir, I wish to go along. I refuse not to answer any law, but I do not consider myself safe here.
Thomas Ford assured Joseph.
And you shall have protection, General Smith. I did not make this promise without consulting my officers, who all pledged their honor to its fulfillment. I do not know that I shall go tomorrow to Nauvoo, but if I do, I will take you along.
Dan Jones and Stephen Markham spent part of the afternoon of June 26, 1844, shaping and hewing the warped door with a penknife so it would lock. About mid-afternoon, Constable Bettesworth appeared at the jail demanding that the prisoners be released to his custody. The jailer, Mr. Stegall, could find no law authorizing a justice of the peace to remove prisoners committed to his charge. Justice Robert F. Smith then directed a company of the Carthage Greys under command of Frank Worrell to march to the jail and secure Joseph and Hyrum. These proceedings were closely followed by the prisoners. Joseph, seeing the mob gathering and assuming a threatening aspect, concluded it best to go along with them then, and putting on his hat, walked boldly into the midst of a hollow square of the Carthage Greys. Yet evidently expecting to be massacred in the streets before arriving at the courthouse, politely locked arms with the worst mobocrat he could see, and Hyrum locked arms with Joseph, followed by Dr. Richards, and escorted by a guard. Elders Taylor, Jones, Markham, and Fulmer followed outside the hollow square and accompanied them to the courtroom. Joseph and Hyrum finally faced Justice Robert F. Smith on an examination of the charge of treason. Counsel for the brothers soon arrived requesting subpoenas for the witnesses and demanding that the court proceed with the examination. Yet they wished to delay the proceedings just long enough to get witnesses from Nauvoo. Mr. Reed appealed for a continuance of the case until witnesses could be brought. The opposing counsel, Mr. Skinner, proposed that the court adjourn until afternoon of the following day, June 27th, which was accepted by the court. Joseph and Hyrum were again held in the Carthage jail. During the evening, Patriarch Hyrum Smith read to Joseph and others from the Book of Mormon. He made comments on the imprisonments and deliverance of the servants of God for the gospel's sake. The prophet then bore a powerful testimony to the guards of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon and the restoration of the gospel, the administration of angels, and that the kingdom of God was again established upon the earth. The brethren retired at a late hour. Joseph and Hyrum lay on the only bed in the room. The others slept on mattresses on the floor. However, Dr. Richards continued to write until his last candle burned out, leaving him in the dark. Hearing the firing of a gun, Joseph grew uncomfortable and joined those sleeping on the floor. Extending his right arm, Joseph said to John S. Fulmer,
Lay your head on my arm for a pillow, Brother John.
And when all were quiet, they conversed in a low tone about the prospects of their deliverance. Joseph gave expression to several presentiments that he had to die, and said,
I would like to see my family again, and I would to God that I could preach to the saints in Nauvoo once more.
Fulmer tried to rally his spirits, saying he thought he would often have that privilege, when Joseph thanked him for the remarks and good feelings expressed to him. Soon after, Dr. Richards retired to the bed which Joseph had left, and when all were apparently fast asleep, Joseph whispered to Dan Jones,
Are you afraid to die?
Dan said,
Has that time come, think you? Engaged in such a cause, I do not think that death would have many terrors.
Joseph replied,
You will yet see Wales, and fulfill the mission appointed you before you die.
Joseph's prophecy concerning Dan Jones was literally fulfilled. The next day he escaped an attempted ambush by 12 riflemen and lived to perform a mission in Wales, where he was the Lord's instrument in converting hundreds of his native countrymen. The next morning, Dan Jones was directed by Joseph to inquire of the guard concerning the commotion in the night. Frank Worrell responded,
We've had too much trouble to bring old Joe here to let him ever escape alive. And unless you want to die with him, you'd better leave before sundown. And you're not a blasted bit better than him for taking his part. And you'll see that I can prophesy better than old Joe, for neither he, nor his brother, nor anyone who will remain with them will see the sun set today.
When the bitter spirit of the Carthage Greys was reported to Joseph, he sent Dan Jones to see the governor. Governor Ford merely replied,
You are unnecessarily alarmed for the safety of your friends, sir. The people are not that cruel.
When Dan attempted to re-enter the jail, the guard would not let him in. Strangely, Cyrus H. Wheelock, who had also called on the governor, was given admittance to the jail without any problem. There had been rain that morning, and Brother Wheelock was wearing his overcoat. In the side pocket, he had placed a six-shooter of the pepper-box variety, which remained undetected by the guard. Cyrus slipped this revolver to Joseph during the visit. John S. Fulmer had previously given the prophet a single-shot pistol. Joseph passed the single shot on to Hyrum with the instruction,
You may have use for this.
Breaking his solemn promise to Joseph, Governor Ford went to Nauvoo without taking the prophet with him. His escort consisted of those men most friendly to the prisoners. The Carthage Greys, avowed enemies of the saints, were left to guard the jail. Governor Ford disbanded the other troops which had been called up for the emergency. Yet 200 to 300 men remained encamped some 8 miles from Carthage on the Warsaw Road. These men constituted a mob force intent on the destruction of Joseph and the saints. Early in the afternoon, June 27, 1844, Dr. Richards became ill. Since Stephen Markham had a pass from the governor to come and go, he was sent out to get some medicine for Willard. As he tried to re-enter the jail, the guard halted him. A company of Carthage Greys surrounded him, placed him on his horse, and forced him to leave town at the point of the bayonet. With each passing hour, the guards became more and more hostile toward the prisoners, frequently using foul language and telling what they would do when the excitement was over. As the afternoon continued, the prisoners became increasingly depressed. They sensed a strong feeling of impending doom. To ease the building tension, John Taylor began to sing a song which had been introduced in Nauvoo, A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief. Its lines portrayed the love of the Savior for those who faithfully serve him and suffer for his sake. The following verses are among those sung by John Taylor on that occasion.
A poor wayfaring man of grief hath often crossed me on my way, who sued so humbly for relief that I could never answer nay. I had not power to ask his name, whither he went or whence he came, yet there was something in his eye that won my love, I know not why. In prison I saw him next, condemned to meet a traitor's doom at morn. The tide of lying tongues I stemmed, and honored him mid shame and scorn. My friendship's utmost zeal to try, he asked if I for him would die. The flesh was weak, my blood ran chill, but the free spirit cried, I will. Then in a moment to my view the stranger started from disguise. The tokens in his hands I knew. The Savior stood before mine eyes. He spake, and my poor name he named. Of me thou hast not been ashamed. These deeds shall thy memorial be. Fear not. Thou didst them unto me.
When Brother Taylor concluded, Joseph asked that he sing it again. John complied with the prophet's request. About this time, the jailer, Mr. Stiggle, came to the brethren and made the suggestion that the prisoners would be safer in the cell. Joseph replied to him.
After supper we will go in.
The prophet then addressed Dr. Willard Richards and said,
If we go into the cell, will you go in with us?
Elder Richards answered,
Brother Joseph, you did not ask me to cross the river with you. You did not ask me to come to Carthage. You did not ask me to come to jail with you. And do you think I would forsake you now? But I will tell you what I will do. If you are condemned to be hung for treason, I will be hung in your stead, and you shall go free.
With all the earnestness of his soul, Willard Richards expressed his great love for the prophet and his willingness to lay down his very life for him. Such loyalty to the Lord's anointed reminds each of us of our obligation to serve the designated prophet. From a position at the front window of the jail, John Taylor was the first to see a large body of men numbering about 100 moving toward them. As the mob surrounded the building, a cry of surrender was heard at the front door downstairs, accompanied by the firing of some weapons. The mob rushed past the guards and up the stairs. At the warning shout of John Taylor, Joseph sprang to his coat for his six-shooter, Hyrum for a single barrel, Taylor for Markham's large hickory cane, and Dr. Richards for Taylor's cane, all sprang against the door. As a shot came through the door, Hyrum retreated backward, but directly into the line of fire. Another shot through the door struck him on the left side of his nose. He fell to the floor exclaiming, I am a dead man. He was again hit by shots which entered his left side, throat, and left leg. Seeing the condition of his brother, Joseph exclaimed,
Oh, dear Brother Hyrum!
And opening the door a few inches, discharged his pistol into the mob. Elder Taylor made every attempt to knock down the guns of the mob with a walking stick. However, he found that this was futile. He tried to run to the window on the east in order to jump out. As he did so,
A ball fired from within struck him on his left thigh, hitting the bone and passing through to within half an inch of the other side. He fell on the windowsill. When a ball fired from the outside struck his watch in his vest pocket and threw him back into the room. After he fell into the room, he was hit by two more balls, one of them injuring his left wrist considerably, and the other entering at the side of the bone just below the left knee. He rolled under the bed, which was at the right of the window in the southeast corner of the room.
while lying under the bed, he was struck in the left hip by a fourth ball. The smashed watch, which saved Elder Taylor's life, was stopped at 16 minutes and 26 seconds after 5 o'clock, and thus marked the time of the tragedy. Joseph recognized that there was apparently no safety for anyone in the room. He probably thought that he could save the lives of the others if he could only escape. Sensing a need to preserve the lives of the others, Joseph sprang to the same window that Elder Taylor had attempted to leap through. As he did so, 2 balls pierced him from the door, and one entered his right breast from without. And he fell outward, exclaiming,
"Oh, Lord, my God!"
The prophet of the Restoration was dead. His faithful brother Hyrum was companion to him in that martyrdom. Enemies of the saints rejoiced at the deaths of these Mormon leaders. However, the saints could only experience a deep lamentation in this great loss. It was with strong personal feeling that a survivor of that terrible deed, John Taylor, penned these inspired and immortal words.
To seal the testimony of this book, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Book of Mormon, we announce the martyrdom of Joseph Smith, the prophet, and Hyrum Smith, the patriarch. Joseph Smith, the prophet and seer of the Lord, has done more, save Jesus only, for the salvation of men in this world than any other man that ever lived in it. In the short space of 20 years, he has brought forth the Book of Mormon, which he translated by the gift and power of God, and has been the means of publishing it on 2 continents, has sent the fullness of the everlasting gospel which it contained to the 4 quarters of the earth, has brought forth the revelations and commandments which compose this book of doctrine and covenants, and many other wise documents and instructions for the benefit of the children of men, gathered many thousands of the Latter-day Saints, founded a great city, and left a fame and name that cannot be slain. He lived great, and he died great in the eyes of God and his people, and like most of the Lord's anointed in ancient times, has sealed his mission and his works with his own blood. And so has his brother Hyrum. In life they were not divided, and in death they were not separated.
The mob at Carthage had carried out the murder of the prophet Joseph Smith, where other enemies had previously failed. As the fatal shots pierced Joseph's body and he fell from the window, everything was in confusion at the jailhouse. One of the murderers at the door of the debtor's cell shouted, "He's leaped the window!" With this, the mob ran down the stairway and around the corner to where Joseph lay. Inside the room, Willard Richards had moved to the window with the thought of escape, but quickly drew back.
Thinking it of no use to leap out on 100 bayonets, and then around General Smith's body.
Unable to contain his anxiety concerning the fate of the prophet, Elder Richards again stepped to the window in a determined effort to see the end of one whom he loved so much. Dr. Richards described his actions at that moment.
Being fully satisfied that he was dead, with 100 men near the body and more coming around the corner of the jail, and expecting a return to our room, I rushed toward the prison door, at the head of the stairs and through the entry from whence the firing had proceeded, to learn if the doors into the prison were open. When near the entry, Mr. Taylor, Elder John Taylor, was lying wounded on the floor under the bed, called out, "Take me." I pressed my way till I found all doors unbarred. Returning instantly, caught Mr. Taylor under my arm, and rushed by the stairs into the dungeon, or inner prison, stretched him on the floor, and covered him with the bed, in such a manner as not likely to be perceived, expecting an immediate return of the mob. I said to Mr. Taylor, "This is a hard case to lay you on the floor, but if your wounds are not fatal, I want you to live to tell the story." I expected to be shot the next moment, and stood before the door awaiting the onset.
Some of the mob again came into the jail, but fled when a cry was heard from without. "The Mormons are coming!" Frightened by the thought of being caught at the scene of their murderous deed, they immediately scattered. No Mormon force was approaching Carthage, but the timely cry undoubtedly saved Elders Richards and Taylor from possible discovery and serious consequences. Dr. Richards went out to view the prophet's body and to determine the whereabouts of the mob. Finding that they had indeed fled, he felt a growing sense of safety. On returning to the cell, he lifted the ticking or mattress off John Taylor and moved him to the landing at the head of the stairs. Dr. Richards then left to secure aid for his wounded companion and to make arrangements for the care of the martyrs' bodies. John Taylor lay on the floor, suffering the agonizing pain produced by 4 wounds, and experienced a dull, lonely, sickening sensation. As he viewed the body of Hyrum lying nearby and thought of Joseph, he said,
When I reflected that our noble chieftain, the prophet of the living God, had fallen, and that I had seen his brother in the cold embrace of death, it seemed as though there was a void or vacuum in the great field of human existence to me, and a dark, gloomy chasm in the kingdom, and that we were left alone. Oh, how lonely was that feeling, how cold, barren, and desolate. In the midst of difficulties, he was always the first in motion. In critical positions, his counsel was always sought. As our prophet, he approached our God and obtained for us his will. But now our prophet, our counselor, our general, our leader was gone. And amid the fiery ordeal that we then had to pass through, we were left alone without his aid. And as our future guide for things spiritual and temporal, and for all things pertaining to this world or the next, he had spoken for the last time on earth. The doctor, on seeing a ball lodged in my left hand, took a penknife from his pocket and made an incision in it for the purpose of extracting the ball therefrom, and having obtained a pair of carpenter's compasses, made use of them to draw or pry out the ball, alternately using the penknife and compasses. After sawing for some time with a dull penknife and prying and pulling with the compasses, he ultimately succeeded in extracting the ball, which weighed about half an ounce. Some time afterwards, he remarked to a friend of mine that I had nerves like the devil to stand what I did in its extraction. I really thought I had need of nerves to stand such surgical butchery, and that whatever my nerves may be, his practice was devilish.
Sensing the need to move the wounded man to more comfortable quarters, those about him suggested that they be allowed to take him to the Hamilton Hotel, but Elder Taylor steadfastly refused. He was alarmed over their motives and feared that the plot of the murderers might still have another scene to be enacted. His emotions, undoubtedly heightened by the pain of his wounds, caused John to exclaim to the company about him,
"I don't know you. Whom am I among? I am surrounded by assassins and murderers. Witness your deeds. Don't talk to me of kindness or comfort. Look at your murdered victims. Look at me. I want none of your counsel nor comfort. There may be some safety here. I can be assured of none anywhere."
However, when Elder Willard Richards had concluded making arrangements for the coroner's inquest, he was able to persuade John Taylor that he could best be cared for at the Hamilton Hotel. It was with difficulty that the necessary help was obtained to carry Elder Taylor to the hotel. Brother Richards next had a hard time convincing Mr. Hamilton that he and his family should not leave like other members of the community who had already fled in wild confusion. Many feared that the Nauvoo Legion would come and seek vengeance for the murders. As Elders Richards and Taylor had an opportunity to discuss matters in their room, they expressed their concern for what might happen in Nauvoo when word of the killings was received among the people. Knowing that all of the other apostles were away in the East or in England, and that none of the 12 were present to give counsel to the saints, these brethren felt the burden of responsibility of calming the citizens. The following communication was penned and placed in the hands of two messengers.
Carthage Jail, 8:05 o'clock p.m., June 27th, 1844. Joseph and Hyrum are dead. Taylor wounded, not very badly. This latter note was added by Brother Taylor out of a concern for his family. I am well. Our guard was forced, as we believe, by a band of Missourians from 100 to 200. The job was done in an instant, and the party fled towards Nauvoo instantly. This is as I believe it. The citizens here are afraid of the Mormons attacking them. I promise them not. W. Richards. N.B. The citizens promise us protection. Alarm guns have been fired. John Taylor.
The above note was directed to Governor Ford, General Dunham, and Colonel Markham, both of the Nauvoo Legion, and Emma Smith, now a widow. While tragedy stalked the prophet and Hyrum in Carthage, Governor Ford and his bodyguard were in Nauvoo. There the governor addressed an assemblage of saints. Adopting a very hard line, he declared,
"A great crime has been done by destroying the expositor press and placing the city under martial law, and a severe atonement must be made. So prepare your minds for the emergency. Another cause of excitement is the fact of your having so many firearms. The public are afraid that you're going to use them against government. I know there's a great prejudice against you on account of your peculiar religion, but you ought to be praying saints, not military saints. Depend on it. A little more misbehavior from the citizens, and the torch which is already lighted will be applied, and the city may be reduced to ashes, and extermination would inevitably follow. And it gave me great pain to think there was danger of so many innocent women and children being exterminated. If anything of a serious character should befall the lives or property of the persons who are prosecuting your leaders, you will be held responsible."
Governor Thomas Ford was invited to stay in Nauvoo until the following morning, but he declined the offer. As he and his troop moved out of the city, they attempted to impress the saints with a military maneuver. Witnesses affirmed,
"In passing up Main Street, his escort performed the sword exercise. giving all the passes, guards, cuts and thrusts, taking up the entire width of the street, and making as imposing a show as they could until they passed Lyon's store near the Masonic Hall. This was apparently done to intimidate the people, as the governor had remarked in his speech that they need not expect to set themselves up against such well-disciplined troops.
The two messengers assigned to carry the first message of Apostles Taylor and Richards from Carthage to Nauvoo were afraid to complete the task and so passed the communication to Arza Adams. Arza and a Mr. Benjamin Leyland started for Nauvoo about midnight, and they arrived a little after sunrise. They were surprised to find that the Saints already knew of the tragedy. The sad news had been brought in by George D. Grant. George Grant and David Bettesworth had learned of the murders and hastened toward Nauvoo. However, they were intercepted by Governor Ford and his troop just 3 miles out from Nauvoo. By order of the governor, these messengers were prevented from entering the city. Fearing an attack from the Mormons, Governor Ford wanted time to remove the Hancock County records and public documents from Carthage before the Nauvoo Legion could move against that community. Grant and Bettesworth were required to return to the Grant home near Carthage. Eventually, Brother Grant was able to secure a horse and slip away to Nauvoo, where he informed the Saints. Samuel H. Smith, brother of the prophet, lived on a farm some 9 miles from Nauvoo. When he learned of his brother's imprisonment in Carthage, he was greatly concerned for their safety. On that fateful day, June 27, 1844, he was determined to join Joseph and Hyrum at the county seat and give them any assistance that he could. A daughter of Samuel has left us this stirring account of her father's attempt to reach the side of his brothers.
He set out for Carthage, taking with him a 14-year-old boy who was working for him. They traveled by team and wagon, and when they neared Carthage, were met by a guard of the mob, who, apprehending his coming, had been placed there to intercept him. They allowed the boy to proceed with the team, but he was turned back. He gave the boy instructions to go direct to Hamilton House in Carthage, and there await further orders. He then returned home as quickly as possible, purchased a horse noted for its speed, and determined to reach his brothers in time to be of assistance to them, although the hope seemed a forlorn one. He went unarmed, and as he again neared Carthage, he met several people coming from there in great haste, among them a man and a woman in a buggy, of whom he asked what had happened, and received answer that the 2 Smiths had been killed by the mob. The terrible shock was too much for him, and for an instant he reeled in his saddle, and they expected him to fall. Then, as the necessity of immediate action flashed across his mind, he steadied himself, saying, "God help me, I must go to them." And he again pressed forward. The mob, expecting his return and intent upon murder, were secreted in a thicket, and 2 men on horseback with rifles gave chase. As they emerged from the thicket, the man in the buggy gave a warning shot. My father, turning his head quickly, took in the situation at a glance and put his horse to its utmost speed, still keeping his course straight toward Carthage. His splendid horsemanship kept him somewhat out of the range of the bullets sent after him. The one passed through the top of his hat. The chase was a long and exciting one, but he finally outdistanced them and rode into Carthage and made his way to the jail.
Samuel first went to the Hamilton Hotel and gave what assistance he could in caring for the bodies of Joseph and Hyrum. At midnight, Willard Richards wrote still another letter to Nauvoo. The brethren were anxious to calm the troubled saints. This note was addressed to Emma Smith and Major General Dunham of the Nauvoo Legion. In addition to Willard's signature, John Taylor and Samuel Smith affixed their names. The letter reads,
"The governor has just arrived. Says all things shall be inquired into and all right measures taken. I say to all the citizens of Nauvoo, my brethren, be still and know that God reigns. Don't rush out of the city. Don't rush to Carthage. Stay at home and be prepared for an attack from Missouri mobbers. The governor will render every assistance possible, has sent out orders for troops. Joseph and Hyrum are dead. We will prepare to move the bodies as soon as possible. The people of the county are greatly excited and fear the Mormons will come and take vengeance. I have pledged my word the Mormons will stay at home as soon as they can be informed, and no violence will be on their part. And say to my brethren in Nauvoo, in the name of the Lord, be still, be patient. Only let such friends as choose come here to see the bodies. Mr. Taylor's wounds are dressed and not serious. I am sound. Willard Richards, John Taylor, Samuel H. Smith. Defend yourself until necessary protection can be furnished. June 27th, 1844.
Early on the morning of June 28th, Governor Thomas Ford went to the public square and advised the remaining inhabitants of Carthage to leave. He said that he expected the Mormons to come and burn down the town. The governor and his posse then fled to Quincy, Illinois for their own safety. About 8 a.m., Dr. Willard Richards, Samuel Smith, and Mr. Artois Hamilton started for Nauvoo with the bodies of the martyrs. The bodies were put in caskets, and the caskets were then placed on 2 separate wagons. The coffins were next covered with bushes to keep them from the hot sun. Samuel and Dr. Richards drove the wagon containing Joseph's remains, while the other was manned by Mr. Artois Hamilton. A guard of 8 soldiers was detached by General Deming for the purpose of accompanying the wagons. The caravan arrived at the head of Mulholland Street in Nauvoo about 3 p.m. It was met by a massive gathering of saints. At their head was the Nauvoo City Council, the Lieutenant General's staff, Major General Jonathan Dunham and staff, Acting Brigadier General Hosea Stout and staff, and commanders and officers of the Legion, amid the most solemn lamentations and wailings that ever ascended into the ears of the Lord of Hosts. The bodies were taken to the mansion house and prepared for public viewing the next day. On the morning of June 29th, the martyrs were placed in coffins covered with black velvet and fastened with brass nails. A square glass plate was placed in the lid of the coffins to protect the faces of the fallen leaders. The caskets were then put into rough pine boxes, and the saints admitted for the viewing. It is estimated that 10,000 people viewed the prophet and the patriarch that day in the mansion house. From 8 a.m. until 5 p.m., a steady stream of mourners filed in the west door and out the north. The family and friends of Joseph and Hyrum feared that enemies of the saints might attempt to disturb the remains of the 2 brothers if their grave sites were actually known. Mobbers had threatened the act, and it was therefore thought advisable to conduct a mock funeral. Afterwards, the martyrs were to be buried in an unknown grave. With this in mind, the coffins were taken to the little bedroom in the northeast corner of the mansion, and the door was locked. The coffins were removed from the pine boxes, and bags of sand placed in each of the boxes. They were nailed shut. The sand-filled boxes were accompanied to the cemetery by a few men for public burial. As the hearse moved slowly to its destination, the small company passed by the meeting grounds of the saints, where a large congregation listened to a funeral sermon preached by William W. Phelps. Near midnight, the burial of the authentic coffins took place. The coffins were taken from the mansion house by Demick B. Huntington, Edward Hunter, William Marks, Jonathan H. Holmes, Gilbert Goldsmith, Alpheus Cutler, Lorenzo D. Wasson, and Philip B. Lewis. These men were preceded by Brother James Emmett, who with his musket served as guard. Their actions on that occasion and the subsequent reburial of the bodies have been described.
They went through the garden, round by the pump, and were conveyed to the Nauvoo house, which was then built to the first joist of the basement and buried in the basement story. After the bodies were interred and the ground smoothed off as it was before, and chips of wood and stone and other rubbish thrown over so as to make it appear like the rest of the ground around the graves, a most terrific shower of rain, accompanied with thunder and lightning, occurred, and obliterated all traces of the fact that the earth had been newly dug. The bodies remained in the cellar of the Nauvoo house, where they were buried until the fall, when they were removed by Demick B. Huntington, William D. Huntington, Jonathan H. Holmes, and Gilbert Goldsmith, at Emma's request.
In the latter move, they were placed side by side just south of the Joseph Smith homestead. Many years later, Frederick M. Smith, grandson of the prophet Joseph, again arranged for the uncovering of the graves during the month of January 1928. This time, the remains were placed a little higher on the hill immediately southwest of the existing homestead. Here, the prophet was reinterred with his wife Emma Smith placed on Joseph's right side and Hyrum on the left. It is in this attitude that the gravesite is viewed by today's visitor to Nauvoo. Of the original 6 brothers in the Smith family, only 2 remained following the martyrdom, Samuel and William Smith. Unfortunately, even this condition did not last. Within a month's time, Samuel H. Smith was also dead. After viewing the bodies of her sons, Joseph and Hyrum, Lucy Mack Smith was approached by Samuel, who said to her,
"Mother, I have a dreadful distress in my side, ever since I was chased by the mob. And I think I've received some injury which is going to make me sick."
The predicted illness did come, and he never recovered from the effects. A daughter of Samuel described the final moments of her father's life.
The tread in the sick room became more soft, the whispers more low, then a silence, save for sobs. Our great and noble father had passed to the great beyond to meet his martyred brothers and all the dear ones gone before him.
Samuel H. Smith passed away on July 30th, 1844. Elder John Taylor remained in Carthage for a few days following his escape from death. His wife Leonora and his father and mother joined him on June 29th. A non-Mormon doctor also called on him and removed a ball the size of a quarter from his left thigh. At last, on July 2nd, William Marks, Dr. Ellis, James Allred, and a number of the brethren came with a wagon to take him to Nauvoo. However, Elder Taylor was so weak from his loss of blood and the discharge from his wounds that he could not ride in the wagon without severe pain. Another method of transportation was quickly devised.
A litter was prepared for him, and a number of men living in Carthage, some of whom had been engaged in the mob, assisted in carrying him. Once on the way, word was sent to some of the saints living along the route, not far from Carthage, to come and meet them. Meantime, the men from Carthage made one excuse after another for leaving until all were gone, much to the relief of the wounded man, who expressed himself as glad to get rid of them. The tramping of those who carried him at last produced violent pain. A sleigh was therefore obtained and hitched to the back of James Allred's wagon. A bed was made on the sleigh, and with Sister Taylor by his side to bathe his wounds with ice water, the company moved on towards Nauvoo. The sleigh slipped along over the grass of the prairie almost without a jar. 5 or 6 miles from Nauvoo, the saints who had learned of his coming turned out to meet him, and they increased in numbers as the party with the wounded man drew nearer, until soon there were troops of friends about him on every hand.
Elder John Taylor had been miraculously preserved by the hand of the Lord to later serve the church as its 3rd president. The loss of the prophet Joseph and patriarch Hyrum came as a great shock to the saints. Despite Joseph's own predictions of approaching death, even those who were close to him were largely taken unawares. The prophet was only 38 years of age and had been shielded from harm so many times that the saints could hardly believe he would not always be protected. This was the first time that the quorum of the first presidency had been disorganized by the death of a president. The revelation given in Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, clearly outlines that the quorum of the 12 apostles was equal in authority to the first presidency. However, without the guiding hand of Joseph, it is easy to see why there was so much confusion during those initial days of trial. To Willard Richards fell the difficult task of notifying the leadership of the church that the prophet was dead. He appointed messengers to call the other members of the quorum of the 12 home from their eastern missions. With no means of telegraph or telephone, it was some time before all could be told of the murders. Interestingly enough, the brethren had received a personal witness that something terrible had occurred even before receiving word from Nauvoo or other sources. Wilford Woodruff was sitting in a Boston railway station with Brigham Young at the moment of the Carthage shootings. He recalled,
"The day of the martyrdom, Brigham Young and myself were seated in the railroad station at the time Joseph and Hyrum were assassinated. This was June 27th, 5:15 in the evening at Carthage, Illinois. It was 6:30 in Boston. As we sat in the station, Brigham was very sorrowful and depressed in spirit, not knowing the cause. This was the time when Satan struck the heaviest blow he had struck since the Son of God was crucified. We well knew afterwards why all the 12, wherever they were on that day and at that time, were like the president of our quorum, sorrowful and burdened in spirit without knowing why."
Parley P. Pratt was visited with similar sensations, saying,
"A day or two previous to this circumstance,
the martyrdom,
I had been constrained by the Spirit to start prematurely for home without knowing why or wherefore. And on the same afternoon, I was passing on a canal boat near Utica, New York, on my way to Nauvoo. My brother, William Pratt, being then on a mission to the same state, happened providentially to take passage on the same boat. As we conversed together on the deck, a strange and solemn awe came over me, as if the powers of hell were let loose. I was so overwhelmed with sorrow I could hardly speak, and after pacing the deck for some time in silence, I turned to my brother William and exclaimed, 'Brother William, this is a dark hour. The powers of darkness seem to triumph, and the spirit of murder is abroad in the land, and it controls the hearts of the American people, and a vast majority of them sanction the killing of the innocent. My brother, let us keep silence and not open our mouths. If you have any pamphlets or books on the fullness of the gospel, lock them up, show them not. Neither open your mouth to the people. Let us observe an entire and solemn silence, for this is a dark day and the hour of triumph for the powers of darkness. Oh, how sensible I am of the spirit of murder which seems to pervade the whole land.'" This was June 27, 1844. In the afternoon, and as near as I can judge, it was the same hour that the Carthage mob was shedding the blood of Joseph and Hyrum Smith and John Taylor, near 1,000 miles distant.
Bidding farewell to his brother in western New York, Parley pressed on toward Chicago. The impressions of the Spirit were confirmed as his steamer touched at a Wisconsin landing and again in Chicago. News of the deaths had spread like wildfire. Elder Pratt commenced the last leg of his journey to Nauvoo, weighed down with gloom. He related,
"As I walked along over the plains of Illinois, lonely and solitary, I reflected as follows. I am now drawing near to the beloved city. In a day or two I shall be there. How shall I meet the sorrowing widows and orphans? How shall I meet the aged and widowed mother of these two martyrs? How shall I meet an entire community bowed down with grief and sorrow unutterable? What shall I say? Or how console and advise 25,000 people who will throng about me in tears and in the absence of my president and the older members of the now presiding council will ask counsel at my hands? Shall I tell them to fly to the wilderness and deserts? Or shall I tell them to stay home and take care of themselves and continue to build the temple? With these reflections and inquiries, I walked onward, weighed down, as it were, unto death.
Parley P. Pratt's troubled mind, however, was miraculously eased by an answer to heartfelt prayer. Elder Pratt recorded,
When I could endure it no longer, I cried out aloud, saying, O Lord, in the name of Jesus Christ, I pray thee, show me what these things mean, and what I shall say to thy people. On a sudden, the Spirit of God came upon me, and filled my heart with joy and gladness indescribable. And while the spirit of revelation glowed in my bosom, with as visible a warmth and gladness as if it were fire, the Spirit said unto me, Lift up your head and rejoice, for behold, it is well with my servants Joseph and Hyrum. My servant Joseph still holds the keys of my kingdom in this dispensation, and he shall stand in due time on the earth, in the flesh, and fulfill that to which he is appointed. Go and say unto my people in Nauvoo, that they shall continue to pursue their daily duties, and take care of themselves, and make no movement in church government to reorganize or alter anything until the return of the remainder of the quorum of the 12. But exhort them that they continue to build the house of the Lord, which I have commanded them to build in Nauvoo.
By order of the 12, a notice was placed in the Prophet, a Mormon newspaper edited in New York City, advising all elders who had families in Nauvoo to return there immediately for a general council. Wilford Woodruff met Orson Hyde and Orson Pratt in New York City. This trio joined Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, and Lyman White in Schenectady, New York, and they journeyed toward Illinois together. Their route took them from Buffalo, New York to Detroit and Chicago by steamship. From Chicago, they went by stage to Galena, Illinois, on the banks of the Mississippi River. Here they boarded the steamship St. Croix, which took them down to Nauvoo, reaching the city on August 6, 1844, at 8 p.m. The brethren received a warm and hearty welcome from their family and friends. Upon their arrival, the apostles found that an opposition group was at work promoting its personal ambitions. Sidney Rigdon, the first counselor in the presidency of the church, had come into Nauvoo on August 3rd from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He had lost much of the spirit of the work and had been previously rejected by the prophet Joseph. Now, with the death of Joseph, he was anxious to acquire a new leadership role. Sidney claimed that on the day of the assassination, he had received a vision from the Lord instructing him to press for the guardianship. Rather than accept an invitation to meet with Apostles Parley P. Pratt, George A. Smith, and Willard Richards at the home of John Taylor, Rigdon met with William Marks, president of Nauvoo Stake, and a few others to make separate plans. Sidney was seeking to have himself named as guardian for the church before Brigham Young and others of the apostles could arrive. On Sunday, August 4th, 1844, Sidney Rigdon addressed a large congregation of the saints. He related the circumstances of his vision and expressed his desire to build up the church to the prophet Joseph Smith. Rigdon urged that a meeting be held the following Tuesday, August 6th, to appoint a guardian. As some objected to the apparent haste with which this meeting was called, it was postponed until Thursday, August 8th. This providential delay gave Brigham Young and his company sufficient time to arrive and take counsel with other leaders. On August 7th, Brigham Young called the 12 together at the home of John Taylor. This body in turn scheduled a meeting of the 12 apostles, high council, and high priest at the 70s Hall at 4 p.m. that same day. President Young requested that Sidney Rigdon give an explanation of his vision and message to the church. Rigdon closed his remarks by saying,
I propose to be a guardian to the people. In this I have discharged my duty and done what God has commanded me, and the people can please themselves whether they accept me or not.
In response to this, Brigham Young stated,
I do not care who leads the church, even though it were Ann Lee, but one thing I must know, and that is what God says about it. I have the keys and the means of obtaining the mind of God on the subject. Joseph conferred upon our heads, the apostles, all the keys and powers belonging to the apostleship, which he himself held before he was taken away. And no man or set of men can get between Joseph and the 12 in this world or in the world to come.
At the request of William Marks, a special meeting of the church was held at the Grove on the morning of Thursday, August 8th, to choose a guardian or a president and trustee. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Sidney Rigdon took his place in a wagon and addressed the large congregation for an hour and one-half. Brigham Young then announced that the brethren would meet with the saints at 2 in the afternoon at that same place. When that hour arrived, Apostles Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Parley P. Pratt, Orson Pratt, Willard Richards, Wilford Woodruff, and George A. Smith met with the congregation. The membership of the quorums of the priesthood was seated according to order. Brigham Young then addressed the multitude of thousands.
For the first time in my life, for the first time in your lives, for the first time in the kingdom of God in the 19th century, without a prophet at our head, do I step forth to act in my calling in connection with the quorum of the 12, as apostles of Jesus Christ unto this generation. Apostles whom God has called by revelation through the prophet Joseph, who are ordained and anointed to bear off the keys of the kingdom of God in all the world. Heretofore you have had a prophet as the mouth of the Lord to speak to you. But he has sealed his testimony with his blood. And now, for the first time, are you called to walk by faith, not by sight. There has been much said about President Rigdon being president of the church and leading the people, being the head. And Brother Rigdon has come 1,600 miles to tell you what he wants to do for you. If the people want President Rigdon to lead them, they may have him. But I say unto you that the quorum of the 12 have the keys of the kingdom of God in all the world. The 12 are appointed by the finger of God. Here is Brigham. Have his knees ever faltered? Have his lips ever quivered? Here is Heber and the rest of the 12, an independent body who have the keys of the priesthood, the keys of the kingdom of God to deliver to all the world. This is true, so help me God. They stand next to Joseph and are as the first presidency of the church.
As Brigham Young spoke, many of his hearers became aware of something marvelous taking place before their eyes. While in the process of delivering this important sermon, his whole being was transfigured, and it appeared to numbers of his hearers as though Joseph, not Brigham, were speaking. The mantle or form of the prophet Joseph was manifested upon the person of Brigham Young. George Vernon Morris Sr. was seated directly in front of Brigham Young with his head down when Brigham arose to speak. George testified.
I was startled by hearing Joseph's voice. I raised my head suddenly, and the first thing I saw was Joseph, as plain as I ever saw him in my life.
Reddick Newton Allred was also present and stated,
Brigham Young, the president of the 12, took the stand, and the mantle of Joseph rested upon him with such power that all Israel knew he was the man. I saw and heard and felt that the prophet stood before us in the person of Brigham Young. Therefore, I could not doubt.
Benjamin F. Johnson, who knew the prophet intimately, affirmed,
My back was partly turned to the seats occupied by Apostle Brigham Young and the other apostles, when suddenly, as from heaven, I heard the voice of the prophet Joseph that thrilled my whole being, and quickly turning around, I saw in the transfiguration of Brigham Young the tall, straight, and portly form of the prophet Joseph Smith, clothed in a sheen of light, covering him to his feet. And I heard the real and perfect voice of the prophet, even to the whistle, as in years past caused by the loss of a tooth said to have been broken out by the mob at Hyrum. This view or vision, although but for seconds, was to me as vivid and real as the glare of lightning or the voice of thunder from the heavens.
The saints who were privileged to view this transformation had no doubt as to its significance in the Lord's selection of the lawful successor to the prophet. Amasa Lyman, W. Phelps, and Parley P. Pratt next spoke to the congregation. They were followed by Brigham Young, who then presented the business of the meeting in the following terms.
I will ask you as quorums, do you want Brother Rigdon to stand forward as your leader, your guide, your spokesman? President Rigdon wants me to bring up the other question first, and that is, does the church want, and is it their only desire to sustain the 12 as the first presidency of this people? Here are the apostles, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants. They are written on the tablet of my heart. If the church wants the 12 to stand as the head, the first presidency of the church, and at the head of this kingdom in all the world, stand next to Joseph, walk up into their calling and hold the keys of this kingdom, every man, every woman, every quorum is now put in order, and you are now the sole controllers of it. All that are in favor of this in all the congregation of the saints manifest it by holding up the right hand.
There was a universal vote.
If there are any of the contrary mind, every man and every woman who does not want the 12 to preside, lift up your hands in like manner.
No hand up.
This supersedes the other questions and trying by quorums.
By universal vote, the saints proclaimed their support of Brigham Young and the 12 apostles as their rightful leaders. In later years, President Wilford Woodruff reflected on the extreme difficulties of those important decision-filled days and stated,
"All that President Young or myself or any member of the quorum need have done in the matter was to have referred to the last instructions at the last meeting we had with the prophet Joseph before starting on our mission to the eastern states. I have alluded to that meeting many times in my life. The prophet Joseph, I am now satisfied, had a thorough presentiment that that was the last meeting we would hold together here in the flesh. We had had our endowment. We had had all the blessings sealed upon our heads that were ever given to the apostles or prophets on the face of the earth. On that occasion, the prophet Joseph rose up and said to us, 'Brethren, I have desired to live to see the temple built. I shall never live to see it, but you will. I have sealed upon your heads all the keys of the kingdom of God. I have sealed upon you every key, power, principle that the God of heaven has revealed to me. Now, no matter where I go or what I may do, the kingdom rests upon you.'"
Despite promises by civil authorities that the murderers of the prophet and his brother would be punished, it was not until Tuesday, October 22, 1844, that the Hancock County Grand Jury met with the prosecutor, William Elliott, to hear the evidence in the case. Between that date and the following Saturday, 17 persons testified concerning the murders of Joseph and Hyrum Smith. According to reports, the grand jury was presented with the names of about 60 persons who were involved in the slayings. By vote of the grand jury, this number was reduced to 9 men who were thought to have the most convincing evidence against them. 4 of the men indicted were never arrested nor brought to trial. There were to be 2 trials in order to try the accused, one for the murder of Joseph Smith and another for the murder of Hyrum Smith. After a delay of several months, selection of jurors finally began on Monday, May 19, 1845, in order to try the assassins of Joseph Smith. On that occasion, Carthage was filled with violent men who vowed they would never see their friends hang. Approximately 200 persons, many of them armed, filled the courtroom while hundreds more milled about outside. Judge Richard M. Young, Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, presided at the trial. The saints had little confidence that the state of Illinois could successfully prosecute the murderers. The Mormon leaders, John Taylor, Willard Richards, and others, stayed away from the trial in Carthage. They feared that they would merely endanger their own lives if they appeared in the courtroom. The witnesses who did appear for the prosecution either would not cooperate in answering the questions directed to them, or their testimonies were largely discounted. At 11:30 a.m. on Friday, May 30th, 1845, Judge Young finished his instructions to the jury. When the court reconvened at 2 o'clock, the jury reported their verdict.
"We, the jury, find the defendants not guilty, as charged in the indictment. Jabez A. Beebe, foreman."
The defendants, thus freed, called for an immediate trial on the charge of murdering Hyrum Smith. Judge Richard M. Young ordered a special term of the court to be held on June 24, 1845, for that purpose. However, when Judge Young returned to Carthage on the appointed date, no one appeared for the prosecution. Under the circumstances, the judge ordered that the case be
dismissed for want of prosecution, and that the said defendants be discharged.
The saints could only refer their plight to God for righteous judgment.